Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. He's a member of both the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Let's get back to our top story. New charges in the Russia probe. Alex van der Zwaan, a lawyer with ties to former Trump campaign aide Rick Gates, just entered a guilty plea for lying to federal investigators. How significant is this late-breaking development?
I believe it's significant because it puts pressure on Gates to actually plead guilty. CNN has reported that they expect Rick Gates to plead guilty. And what we're seeing is Robert Mueller putting together his case brick by brick, piece by piece. And Robert Mueller is being very methodical. But this guilty plea would almost lock in Rick Gates' guilty plea later this week. And that puts tremendous pressure on Paul Manafort, and if he were to flip, I think that would be very dangerous for the Trump administration.
Well, if Mueller is turning up the heat on Rick Gates in order to get to Paul Manafort, as you suggest, what kind of information might he be after?
So Rick Gates by himself was the deputy campaign manager for the Trump campaign, and he actually stayed on with the campaign even when Paul Manafort was released. So he might have seen a lot of different things we don't know, but clearly the Robert Mueller team is interested in getting a guilty plea and to get Rick Gates to cooperate. And then we know that Paul Manafort, as a campaign manager, had his hands in a lot of different things. So we're going to wait and see what happens. But as a former prosecutor, it is amazing to watch Robert Mueller be so methodical and put together his case brick by brick, piece by piece.
Because the assumption is he's going after relatively small fish to get bigger fish. So you expect Mueller to keep moving up the chain. Do you expect him perhaps to move all the way up to the president?
It's certainly possible. I do know that he would not have entered into a one-count guilty plea with Michael Flynn in order to get people below Michael Flynn. It would be people at his level or above him. So I expect more indictments to come of more senior people.
Yeah, it looks like this investigation is continuing full speed ahead, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Let me get your reaction, Congressman, to President Trump's claim that he's been much tougher, his words, much tougher on Russia than President Obama was. Do you believe that?
Absolutely not. And all we have to do is look at the bipartisan congressional sanctions law that was passed over 6 months ago. As we sit here today, Donald Trump has still refused to implement the bipartisan congressional sanctions on Russia. He's also refused to condemn the Kremlin, and he has refused to direct the FBI to prevent another attack on our democracy coming this November.
That bipartisan sanctions law, by the way, was passed 98-2 in the Senate. I think 419-3 in the House. The president signed it into law. It was passed way back in August, as you point out. The president signed it because he knew he couldn't override a veto, but he still hasn't gone ahead and actually implemented any sanctions that are demanded as part of that law. How much longer can he continue to delay implementing sanctions because it's the law of the land?
The longer the White House and Donald Trump delays, the more suspicious it looks, because it makes you wonder, what does Putin have on Trump where he won't even implement the bipartisan, bicameral congressional sanctions that is now law and is on his desk to implement? Now, keep in mind that these sanctions, one of the reasons Congress did this was to hold Russia accountable for their attack on our democracy in 2016. So it's not just to deter Russia, it's also to hold them accountable. And so far, Donald Trump is refusing to do that.
Back in December of 2016, then President-elect, he was President-elect Donald Trump, told Time magazine, and I'm quoting him now, "I don't believe they interfered," referring to the Russians in the presidential elections. How do you believe the Russians are interpreting the various mixed signals now coming from the Trump administration, from the White House? All of the president's national security advisors say the Russians did it. They're still doing it. Get ready for more Russian interference. But the president holds back. He doesn't go that far. How do you think the Russians interpret those mixed signals?
Well, it's very clear that everyone in the White House understands and knows that Russia interfered in our elections in 2016, except for the president. And that's very distressing because we know that Russia is going to do this again. And for deterrence to work, it has to not only be credible, but your adversary has to think that you're willing to execute it. And if the leader of the United States is unwilling to direct his FBI to prevent another attack on our elections coming up in 2018, it is very distressing. And that's why I think we need to keep pressure on and make sure that the president imposes sanctions and takes steps to try to prevent Russia from attacking us again.
Even some Democrats, by the way, have criticized the President Obama's response to the Russian meddling. Your colleague, Congressman Adam Schiff, the top Democrat of the House Intelligence Committee, he has publicly said that President Obama and his administration could have and should have done more. What more should they have done?
So I'm sure in hindsight that the Obama administration would have wanted this to have turned out differently, but they did go to Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, and say, look, we want to tell this to Americans. And Mitch McConnell said, do not do that. If you do that, I'm going to say this is purely a partisan political ploy. And so Mitch McConnell a big hand in stopping the administration from coming out with the truth at the time.
But they did come out in early October with a statement, a formal statement from the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Homeland Security, saying that Russia was interfering in the U.S. presidential election. Are you talking about something earlier that the then President Obama wanted to release?
The public reporting is that the Obama administration was going to be a lot more forthcoming with what Russia was doing in terms of interfering with our elections. And they went to the Senate and House leadership, and Mitch McConnell basically shut that down. But there's also something else going on. And really, it was the belief at the time, and everyone really believed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. So I think people are also operating under that assumption, which turned out to be wrong.
Yeah, that was the assumption, the widespread assumption. You don't have to talk too much about this right now because Hillary Clinton was going to win in any case, and after the election, you can talk about it. But that was obviously a false assumption. Congressman Ted Lieu.